I'm Lena Morris, and this is the story of how everything began. I live in America, and though I never thought my life would turn into something that felt like a novel, the way it unfolded left me no choice but to tell it. Sometimes, when I look back, I wonder how one single season could hold so much weight. It all started with my brother's wedding. Noah, my younger brother, had always been the golden child in my parents' eyes. He was charming, funny, and the kind of person who seemed to land on his feet no matter the situation. When he got engaged to Grace, a bright woman from New York with a laugh that carried across the room, my parents were over the moon. From the moment the engagement was announced, the family house on Maple Street buzzed with excitement. Plans flew around, voices overlapped, and everyone talked about the day as if it were a coronation. And in the middle of it all stood me, the dependable sister, the one with the steady job and the credit to match. At first, I was happy to pitch in. After all, it was Noah's big day, and weddings only came once. I thought maybe I could help with the flowers or lend a hand with the guest list. But soon, helping turned into something larger, something heavier. My father came to me one evening in the kitchen while the coffee pot hissed in the background. "Lena," he said, his tone casual but his eyes fixed. "The deposit for the venue came due sooner than expected. Could you cover it? We'll sort it out later." I nodded. It was $10,000, a heavy sum but manageable, or so I told myself. I had some savings and I loved my brother. Then came the caterer, another $12,000. The florist wanted $6,000 for arrangements that seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. The band demanded $5,000, and there was no backup plan. Every week, a new expense landed, and every week my father or mother turned to me with the same hopeful look, as though I were not a daughter, but a vault. "Just this one thing, Lena," Mom would whisper, her hand brushing my arm. "You're so good at handling these things." By the time the wedding rolled around in April, I had poured $50,000 into the event. That number didn't seem real at first. I saw it only on paper, wired transfers from my account, receipts tucked into a neat folder. Yet the reality came to me during the wedding itself. The ballroom in downtown Chicago sparkled with chandeliers. Guests danced in their tuxedos and dresses, laughter floating like champagne bubbles. Noah smiled as if the world had given him everything he wanted, and in a way, it had. The photographer captured every kiss, every toast, every gleam of light. But in the corner of my mind sat that number, glaring, reminding me that every sparkle had been bought with my sweat. When the last guest left and the hall fell silent, I expected some measure of gratitude, or even just a word of acknowledgement. Instead, when we returned to our house on Maple Street, Dad leaned back in his chair, a half-smile pulling at his face. "Your work is finished, so get out of this house," he said. His voice carried not a hint of jest. The words crashed over me like cold water. For a moment, I thought he must be joking. I laughed, a hollow sound. But when I looked at him, his eyes were hard, his lips set. Mom, Helen, stared at the floor as if she were trying to vanish into the woods. Grace, my brand new sister-in-law, avoided my eyes altogether. Noah shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The silence confirmed it. They were casting me out. Something inside me cracked then. I had just spent every dollar I had saved, not on myself, not on some dream of mine, but on their dream. And their repayment was exile. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply walked to my room, pulled a small suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. Clothes, a notebook, a pair of shoes, and the folder with all the receipts. That was all. I left the rest behind. The night air outside was cool, the kind that slips under your coat and makes you shiver. I stepped onto the porch and down to the street, realizing I had no keys, no real place to go. My life felt like it had been reduced to a bag and a bruised heart. But then, in that moment of despair, one name came to mind: Mia. Mia had been my closest friend since college, the kind of friend who always picked up the phone no matter the hour. I called her, my voice trembling as I asked if I could crash for a while. Without hesitation, she said, "Of course, come over." Her apartment was a small, warm place 2 neighborhoods away. When I arrived, she brewed coffee, set a blanket on the couch, and listened. She didn't interrupt as I spilled everything: the costs, the laughter, the cruel dismissal. When I finished, she leaned back and shook her head. "You handled everything," she said softly. "Why are they pushing you out?" I didn't know how to answer. The words knotted in my throat. Instead, I reached into my tote and pulled out the folder. Inside, nestled between receipts, was a different set of papers, the mortgage loan agreement I had signed months before. Dad had begged me then, too. "We need you on this, Lena," he had said. The house was in danger of foreclosure, and his credit was poor. Mine was strong, so I had agreed to co-sign. I thought I was saving the family, keeping the roof over all our heads. He had promised to make the payments every month, swore up and down that it was temporary. But I had read the fine print more carefully than he ever did. There, in small print, was a clause that made me the responsible party. If payments were missed and left uncured, the title of the house would transfer to me. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I trusted him. I trusted them. But sitting in Mia's apartment that night, with the sound of traffic outside and a cup of coffee cooling in my hand, the truth settled in. They had cast me out of a house that, by law, was tethered to me more tightly than to them. They had no idea. I leaned back against the couch, the folder heavy in my lap. "They don't know what they've done," I whispered. Mia frowned, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I shook my head slowly. "You'll see. They think they've ended me. But the story isn't finished yet." And with that, the first chapter of my life's most difficult journey closed. I had lost $50,000, lost the home I thought was mine, and lost the people I had trusted most. But tucked inside that folder was a secret they had overlooked, a truth that would come back to their doorstep sooner than they could imagine. When I left Maple Street that night, all I had with me was a suitcase and a folder that felt heavier than the bag itself. Inside were the receipts for Noah's wedding, but tucked deeper were the loan papers that my father had once begged me to sign. I don't think he even remembered the details. To him, it was just another piece of paper, another deal he'd wriggled his way through. But I had read every single line, and I knew what those pages could mean. The agreement had been born out of desperation. Months before the wedding, the bank had been circling like vultures. My father's debts had piled high, the old house on Maple Street was close to foreclosure, and his credit was a graveyard of missed payments. When he came to me, his words dripped with urgency, but also with pride. "You're the only one who can do this, Lena," he said. "You've got the job, the credit score, the name the bank trusts. Sign with me, and we'll save the family home." At the time, I thought of Mom, of the cracked paint on the porch, of the family photos still nailed to the hallway wall. I thought of Noah, who had always believed that house was eternal, untouchable. So I said yes. I signed my name beneath his, not realizing that in doing so I was laying the groundwork for a storm no one else could see. The clause that changed everything was tucked neatly into the middle of the agreement. It wasn't highlighted, it wasn't bold, but it was there in black and white. If the payments were missed and remained uncured, the responsibility shifted to the co-signer. And not just the debt, the title itself. Ownership, legally and fully, would move into the hands of the person who kept up the obligation. At the time, the banker, a sharp-faced man named James Wright, explained it simply. "It's protection," he said. "The home should always belong to the one who's actually paying for it." I remember nodding, believing that was reasonable. After all, Dad swore he would never miss a payment. I thought I was backing him, not replacing him. But as I sat on Mia's couch weeks later, with the papers spread across the coffee table, the reality hit me like a tidal wave. He had already missed 2 months. The bank had already issued a cure notice, and no one at Maple Street had bothered to open the envelope. Mia sat beside me, her eyes skimming the pages while her hand tightened around a mug of coffee. "This looks serious," she whispered. Her apartment was small, the kitchen table wobbled, and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors. But at that moment, it felt more like home than the house I had just left. I stared down at my signature, neat and certain, and I felt a strange mixture of dread and power. Still, I needed clarity. I needed someone who understood the law, someone who could tell me whether I was clinging to false hope. That's how I met Ava Brooks. She was a lawyer recommended by a coworker, the kind of woman who walked into a room with confidence stitched into every step. She wore simple clothes, no fuss, but her eyes were sharp as glass. We sat together at Mia's wobbly kitchen table. Ava laid the papers out carefully, reading them line by line. Her silence was steady, almost unnerving. Finally, she looked up at me. "You understand what this means, don't you?" she asked. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "If they don't pay," I said slowly, "the house becomes mine." "That's right," Ava confirmed. Her tone carried no judgment, only fact. "And from what I can see, they haven't paid in 2 months. That means the process has already begun. Once the grace period expires, title rights fall to you." It was strange, hearing it spoken aloud by someone else. Part of me felt vindicated, another part terrified. I had been cast out of a house that might, in just weeks, legally belong to me. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Ava leaned back, tapping the papers with one finger. "But listen carefully, Lena. This isn't just about paper. This is about proof. You'll need the bank statements. You'll need the cure notice. You'll need a clean record that shows you stepped up when they stepped out." So we gathered evidence. We called the bank, and we printed statements. Page after page showed what I already knew: silence where payment should have been, empty lines where money should have flowed. 2 months unpaid. The third is on its way to the same fate. Ava highlighted each one, stacking them neatly. "They've ignored reality," she said. "But reality won't ignore them." That night, after Ava left, I stood by Mia's window and looked out at the city. The lights blinked like 1,000 tiny promises, some fulfilled, some broken. I thought of the little globe I once kept on my desk, the one I used to spin when I was a girl. My finger would land on Europe, and I would imagine myself wandering its streets, free and far away. Back then, the world seemed wide. Now, standing in America with a broken heart and a folder full of papers, the world felt narrower, but sharper too. I wasn't dreaming of escape anymore. I was staring at the truth, that my father's laughter, my brother's silence, my mother's downcast eyes, they had all been built on the belief that I would never fight back. That I was soft, dependable, the one who gave without question. But here, in the hum of a borrowed apartment, I realized something. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about survival. I placed the folder back in my bag, zipped it shut, and whispered to myself, "They forgot the paper. They forgot me." And with that, a new kind of fire lit inside me. The house on Maple Street was no longer just theirs. It was tied to me, to my name, to my future. They could laugh. They could push me out. They could pretend I was nothing more than a wallet that had run dry. But the law, cold and unyielding, was on my side. I didn't know yet how it would all play out. I didn't know if I would walk back into that house with my head high, or if the weight of family would crush me before I even tried. But I knew this much. The paper they forgot would not stay forgotten forever. A month later, the knock came, 3 sharp hits on the old front door of the house on Maple Street. I had been waiting for it, though my parents had not. I was standing on the sidewalk with Ava, the folder tucked beneath her arm, when 2 uniformed officers stepped onto the porch. Alongside them was a court clerk holding a stack of papers that carried more weight than any words I could have spoken. The morning air was brisk, and I could see the frost clinging to the edges of the lawn. Officer Mark Delaney, tall and steady with a no-nonsense look, called out, "Robert Morris?" My father opened the door, still in his robe, the same confident posture he had always carried, as though nothing in the world could touch him. Behind him, my mother hovered, her hands wringing the fabric of her sweater. "Sir," the clerk began, his tone official but not unkind, "we're here to serve notice and confirm receipt. There's a recorded default and a transfer of title under the loan agreement." The words landed heavy in the cold air, though they were delivered like any other piece of business. For a moment, Dad simply stared. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as though he could glare the papers out of existence. Then he scoffed, his voice loud and sharp. "This is my house. His eyes swept past the clerk and the officers, landing squarely on me standing at the edge of the walkway. His expression changed, fury mixing with something else, betrayal. "What did you do, Lena?" My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "I paid, and then I read," I told him. "You didn't." Silence hung for a moment, broken only by the sound of a car pulling up at the curb. Noah's old sedan screeched slightly as he parked, the exhaust puffing white into the morning. He stepped out quickly, his tie loose around his neck, his expression confused. Grace followed, pulling her coat tightly around her as the wind whipped across the street. "What's going on?" Noah asked, jogging toward the porch. He glanced between the officers, the clerk, and me, his voice pitched high with panic. Grace stayed behind him, her arms folded, her eyes scanning the scene like an outsider who had stepped into a play she hadn't agreed to watch. The clerk stepped forward, holding out copies of the notice. "Missed payments, no cure. Transfer of ownership," he said plainly. He placed the documents into Dad's unwilling hands. The legal language was simple enough for anyone to understand, even without a lawyer standing nearby. I could see Dad's fingers shaking as he held the pages. His face turned red, his lips pressed thin. "This is a trick," he muttered. He turned to Mom, who stood just behind him, her face pale, her eyes darting between us. She whispered his name, Robert, but he brushed her off with a wave of his hand. The officers didn't move aggressively. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough, a reminder that this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't another family argument that could be swept under the rug. This was the law coming to their door. Noah finally turned toward me. "Lena, what is this? What are they saying?" I met his eyes, and for once, I didn't soften my words. "It means the house is mine now, Noah. Dad didn't pay the loan. The agreement made me the responsible party. They ignored it. I didn't." He looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing as if words would come but never did. Grace tugged his sleeve gently, her voice low. "She's right, Noah. Look at the papers." The porch suddenly felt smaller, the rail lower, the steps narrower. I had grown up running up and down those steps, sitting on that porch swing in the summers, watching the seasons change. Now, it felt tired, worn, almost ashamed. Even the blue paint on the front door seemed duller, as though it knew what was happening. Dad's anger finally broke into words. He turned on me, his voice booming. "You think you can come here with your papers and your lawyers and take what I built? This is my house. I raised you here. I put food on this table. You don't get to walk in and claim it like some prize." I held my ground. "You didn't pay, Dad. You let it slip away. You signed the same papers I did. You knew the risk. I didn't trick you. I read what you refused to. And now this is the result." For a moment, I thought he might explode. His fists clenched, his shoulders tensed. But then his anger crumbled into something else. Defeat. His shoulders sagged, and he dropped the papers onto the console table in the hallway. He couldn't even look at me. Mom stepped forward then, her voice soft and trembling. "What happens now, Lena?" she asked, her eyes wet. Her question wasn't sharp, wasn't defensive. It was weary, the voice of a woman caught in a storm too long. I glanced at Ava, who gave me the smallest nod of reassurance. I took a breath. "What happens now is up to you," I said. "I'm not here to throw you out today, but I am the owner now. Things will change. They have to. No more secrets, no more unpaid bills. If you want to stay, there will be rules and there will be rent. If not, you'll need to move out." The words felt surreal even as I said them. I had been the daughter cast aside, told to get out, dismissed like an afterthought. And now I was standing here, the legal owner, dictating terms. The irony was bitter, but also strangely liberating. Noah finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "Lena, we didn't know." I nodded. "That's the problem. You didn't want to know." The clerk gathered his papers, the officers gave a polite nod, and slowly, they stepped away from the porch, leaving the silence behind. I stood there a moment longer, watching my family, each of them caught in their own web of shock and shame. Then I turned, walked down the path, and joined Ava on the sidewalk. Behind me, the house loomed, The same house that had once been a symbol of family, now a battlefield of truth. And for the first time in years, I felt like it belonged to me, not because of love, but because of law. You might think the moment the title transferred to me, I would slam the door behind my father, tell my family to pack their bags, and claim the house as my own.
Part of me wanted to.
I won't deny it. After all the years of being treated as the dependable one, the one who worked quietly in the background while they spent without thinking, I wanted to stand in the middle of that living room and shout every number into their ears. $50,000 for the wedding, $1,400 for the band's tip, $600 for extra chairs when the guest list magically expanded, $250 for Noah's cufflinks when he forgot to buy them, and 2 full mortgage bills Dad never bothered to pay. I wanted to measure the hurt in dollars because dollars were the only language my family seemed to understand. But when the officers and the clerk left that morning and the house fell into silence again, I realized something. I didn't want revenge. Revenge would be quick, maybe satisfying for a moment, but it would leave me with an empty house and a bigger emptiness inside. What I wanted was order. What I wanted was respect. What I wanted was a life where I wasn't treated as the wallet, the fallback, the one to be laughed at and discarded. So I asked Ava to walk inside with me. We stepped through the front door, into the hallway where the wallpaper peeled and the growth marks of our childhood still etched the wood. Dad glared at me as though I were an intruder, his shoulders stiff. Mom's hand shook, her eyes wet with unspoken words. Noah looked suddenly small, like a boy who had just realized that adulthood was not a crown but a chain. Grace lingered in the corner, her arms folded, no longer the radiant bride but a woman calculating her new reality. I placed my bag on the console table and spoke slowly, with words simple enough that no one could twist them. This house is under my name now. That isn't revenge. That's the agreement. I'm not putting anyone on the street today. But I am the owner, and from now on, there are going to be rules. They all stared at me, as if waiting for me to crack, to laugh and say I was joking. But I didn't. I pulled a printed plan from my folder and laid it flat on the table. Rent, I said, tapping the page. Due on the 1st of every month. Enough to cover the loan and upkeep. A clean ledger. No excuses, no secrets. If you refuse, you'll have 60 days to move. If you agree, you can stay. But you'll live under order, not chaos. And I'll repair the roof, fix the porch, and repaint the walls. This house can survive, but not the way you've run it. Dad let out a short laugh, a sound filled with disbelief, but it faltered halfway through. He looked suddenly smaller, like a suit too big for the body inside it. His anger no longer had weight. His pride, once so untouchable, seemed worn thin. Mom finally whispered, "We can try." Her voice was timid, as though even the act of agreeing might anger him. Noah shifted uncomfortably. "I'll help," he said. He didn't look me in the eyes, but his voice carried sincerity. Grace gave a small nod, softer than I'd ever seen her. That was the moment I knew the balance had shifted. The house was no longer the stage for my father's control. It was mine, not in the sense of ownership alone, but in the sense of responsibility. The officers hadn't just delivered a notice, they had delivered a turning point. The following weeks were uneasy. Dad stomped around, muttering under his breath, his pride bruised more than his finances. Mom kept her head down, quietly tidying the kitchen as if order there might spread through the rest of the house. Noah started bringing me envelopes of cash, rent money gathered from odd jobs and extra shifts. Grace surprised me by making lists of repairs and budgets, her sharp eye finally working in my favor rather than against me. Then 1 month later, I checked my bank account and saw the first rent payment land. It wasn't large, but it was steady, and it was proof. Proof that words could turn into action, that order could rise out of chaos, that a house once drowning in secrets could start to breathe again. That night, I stood under the porch light, looking up at the house. It didn't feel like a weapon anymore. It didn't feel like a prize either. It felt like a promise, one I was finally able to keep. Not for them, but for myself. I bought a new notebook, fresh pages unspoiled by old wounds. On the first page, I made a list. At the top, roof,
Porch. Paint.
savings. Beneath those, I added one more line. Trip fund. Europe, one day. Not to run away, not to escape. Just to see the streets I had dreamed about when I spun the little globe as a girl. To remind myself that I had built something worth leaving and worth coming home to.
Home.
The word felt new. Not Maple Street as it once was, under my father's careless rule, but Maple Street as it was now, under my hand, under my name. It cost me $50,000, 2 months of fear, and one sharp knock at the door. But it gave me more than I lost. It gave me a life I could own in law, in dollars, and most of all, in truth. And that, in the end, was worth every cent.